in the case of agriculture and fisheries. So I'd be interested to hear from the Minister where the cost recovery provisions are in this part of the bill.
I call the honourable member Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and it's my pleasure to take a call on part 2 of this bill around the amendments relating to ballast water. As my colleagues have articulated, Labor supports this bill because it helps our biosecurity systems and staff work more effectively to prevent and control pest and disease incursions. What we have seen over the recent years is the absolute danger and threat that biosecurity pests play to the New Zealand economy. Labor understands the need for how important biosecurity protections are, and that's why under the previous Labor government the investment in biosecurity more than doubled from $94 million in 1999 to $187 million in 2008. This is an incredibly important part of our economy. And one of the important things that this piece of legislation does is that it actually brings the legislation up to date with the technology that is available, both in terms of detecting and dealing with incursions when they're found. So I think one of the important things when we're looking at this, and my colleague Moana Maki just spoke about the need to actually see biosecurity as an overarching piece of legislation that is central to our economic well-being. And I also would like to offer the comment that we need to see how this piece of legislation fits with other areas of investment. Our biosecurity is only ever going to be as strong as two components. One is having the people to monitor and actually having adequate resource in that area. And the second area is ensuring that we invest and continue our investment into the area of science and innovation in the area of biotech. A review was carried out in 2001 and it found that 88% of our biosecurity expenditure was invented in post-border research. When we look at what marine environments were receiving at this time, it was very low. That we were talking about 5% of money that was spent on biosecurity research went into freshwater and 2% into marine environments. But since 2001, there has been an increased emphasis on science in the marine biosecurity area because it's understood what an important part of the New Zealand economy this is, and it's in part these advancements that this legislation will make and able to be used. Marine biosecurity received very little attention until the 1990s, and it was really the arrival of various algae in our shellfish beds that brought it to our attention of just what a significant economic threat that incursions in the marine environment could play. And that is why these Part 2 amendments are so important, that we do have increased activity in our coastal shipping. The field has changed, the sea has changed, and we do have changes happening there, and we need to ensure that we are protecting our environments. New threats have emerged and have become apparent since the previous piece of legislation was passed in 1993, and this is no more particularly so than in the marine area. The marine biosecurity and the risks offered to it by visiting vessels is significant, and the new activity within the 200 miles of the exclusive economic zone opens up some real questions in terms of what organisms may come into play with increased economic activity in our exclusive economic zone. So when we have a think about what our future is and where our economic future lies, aquaculture and our ability to utilise our marine environments is going to be so important to so many parts of our economy. And that is why we believe that it is so important that we do have these regulations around ballast water, that we do have a good regulatory environment that protects the biosecurity of this area. So if we have a look about what is actually needed in this area in terms of the science and the technology, there has been an investment there, and that's focused increasingly on increasing our understanding of the pests that are already present in New Zealand. My colleague Damien O'Connor talked about talked about the fact that biosecurity hazards have been brought into New Zealand waters for a couple of centuries now, that this isn't something new, so we have an existing bank of biosecurity threats. And yes, Mr Chairman.
I call the honourable member Megan Wood.
Thank you very much. So that we need to have this knowledge of what is already there. We also have to have improved survey and surveillance methods so that we can develop detection of what organisms are present and what are going to pose a threat to our marine environments and the economic activities that are happening within those environments. We need to know when a vessel comes in and there is a release of ballast water exactly what it is that we need to be testing for. How is it that we're going to test? How do these tests actually fit with international testing environments? There's various regulatory frameworks that are imposed on our exporters in the shellfish sector in terms of how it is that we test for algal presence within many of our shellfish beds. For example, access to European markets is highly dependent on us still being able to afford a mouse biotoxin assay, and the need to actually keep this capability somewhere within the New Zealand science ecosystem as that we look at how this is funded is vitally important while we still want to have access into various markets. So the ability to actually know what it is we're looking for it and how it is that we're going to test for it is vitally important. But as well as knowing what's there and knowing what tests to use, we also need to develop new detection tools. We need to be thinking about what the next generation of work are, and we need to understand the origin of these incursions if we're going to prevent them. And it's actually having the ability to actually regulate ballast water that's so important to this, because we need to be able to undertake very careful, very considered risk analysis. And this brings me to the point that my colleague Grant Robertson posed, and the Minister that he asked, in terms of how it is that we marry this legislation, this bill, with the exclusive economic zone legislation that's going through the House. The regulatory impact statement for this piece of legislation talks about its relationship with the EEZ legislation and how they'll fit together, and notes that it's not there. A significant question that has been raised throughout the passage of the EEZ, and as we're seeing it go through the House, is around how much risk we really are willing to take in our marine environments. Are we going to take a cautionary approach and invent a whole new way of doing things, or are we going to treat with real seriousness the need to protect our marine environments by adopting already existing standards that are used throughout the world in terms of precautionary approaches to this environment? And this is a question that really does need to be asked, because this bill is all about understanding our biosecurity, not just in a terrestrial way. This is really about strengthening up our marine protections, and we've seen how important the ability to protect our marine environments from biosecurity incursions is. So these are important questions that we're looking to be answered. How it is that it fits with this, how it fits within the wider plan, given it is so important to our economic future and our economic survival. And we need to continue to invest and to innovate in this area of our science, given how important it is. But we need to have the enabling legislation that will allow the utilisation of these technologies. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Mr Chairman.
I think the member has had 4 calls. Let me just check. So that's okay?
No, he's had 4.
No, the member has had 4 calls. Right? The question is that the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 27 be agreed to. Those of that opinion, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that part 2 as amended stand part. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Honourable members, we now turn ourselves to part 3.